I was mentioning to folks coming in that I'm getting to do this debate a mile from my house, but debating ICC, I'm sort of the visitor, I guess, today. So hope I will let roll well. In looking first at Senate Bill 149, I wanted to take a couple of approaches as we look at Senate Bill 149, not just at the bill itself, but at the genesis of the bill and why a legislative solution was looked at in the first place. So looking first at the problem behind Senate Bill 149. Looking popularly in the media and actually on the Senate floor, many of the opposition to the bill tried to frame what we're addressing through this legislation as, quote, a question of whether drug addicts should get government money. That's not the problem that we're facing. That's not the question that we're addressing here tonight, nor the question that we tried to have a legislative solution for with Senate Bill 149. What we're looking at instead, from my opinion, and when I talk to a lot of my constituents in going around and addressing this issue, which came up over and over and over again, is what I really call the application of the Hippocratic Oath to legislation and to government. First, whatever we do, first do no harm. And what we found with our public assistance system, with our unemployment benefits, and with our TANF, temporary assistance to needy families, often referred to as welfare benefits, is that I would hear from you, I would see statistics, that government assistance dollars were being used to purchase illegal drugs. We had money, taxpayer dollars, that were supposed to use to benefit the people of the state of Kansas that were actually leading to the harm of the people in the state of Kansas. We were violating our own promise to taxpayers. We were violating that oath that I believe we all take inherently when you assume an elected position. Government making the problem worse, not government making the problem better. So what we looked at are two basic problems as we form the genesis of Senate Bill 149. The first is, how do you get public assistance funds to the people that need them the most? We're looking today at two types of public assistance funds. You're looking at TANF assistance, and you're looking at unemployment assistance. TANF, by its very definition, temporary assistance to needy families. Who should we target the most with that? I think on the face, the answer is clear, and that is children in poverty. This assistance is targeted towards children in need to benefit those children in need to the greatest extent that we possibly can. And then for unemployment benefits, what problem, what issue are you looking to address in unemployment benefits? Well, at its core, unemployment benefits exist to help those transitioning to a new job, not those who could work but choose not to do so. They're there to bootstrap and to help people in need, not those that don't need the help that are trying to get it anyway. The second general issue we looked at when you're looking at framing this problem that led to Senate Bill 149 is, how can we use the public funds in the way that makes the most positive change? How can those funds, we already talked about the ways that the funds were being used negatively. How can we turn that around? How can we use these funds in a way that will affect change in a positive manner? To me, that answer is simple and straightforward. Treatment and training, helping people work through their addictions, is better than giving them money to feed their addictions. Point blank. Looking at those two issues, then looked at this, and many of you will know the person who was really the chief architect behind Senate Bill 149, who, if he were here debating today, would probably be doing a much better job than I will do, and that's Dalton Bott. And Dalton was my legislative intern, and he and I looked at this and said, okay, these are clear issues. We need to address them. There should be uniform agreement that we need to address these. Is there a legislative way we can solve this? Let's take the first of these three problems. Getting TANF money to needy kids. Is there a way that we can legislatively address that will benefit the kids, benefit the state of Kansas? The first source, the best source, the place we always want to go, and the place the law inherently goes, is that parents are the best conduit of these resources, the best conduit of taking care of kids in need, unless the parent is otherwise impaired or otherwise kept from making those judgments in the best interest of their own children. Illegal drug addiction is a foundation reason, unfortunately, throughout Southeast Kansas, here in our own communities, and really throughout the state, is the biggest cause of keeping parents from being able to use funds and to otherwise provide for their children in the best way possible. How do you solve it? Well, the best way to solve that is to find someone as close to the child as you can that understands the child the best way possible that's drug-free. Someone that is not impaired by an addiction to illegal drugs, that knows the child, that loves the child, that cares for the child, and use those funds in the best way that works for that child. On the second issue, looking at unemployment benefits. Before Senate Bill 149 passed, drug tests were actually, the use of illegal drugs and drug testing by employers were used to game the system. It was a tool, it wasn't a hindrance to getting unemployment benefits. It was a tool specifically used to obtain unemployment benefits. And the way that happens, unfortunately, pretty straightforward and simple. Everyone in this room probably knows, or can find out pretty quickly, the employers in our area that test job applicants for drug use. So what happens? You're using illegal drugs. You go to an employer that you know is going to test you. You apply for that job. The employer tests you. He rejects you because you're using illegal drugs. You go to the unemployment office. You say, see, I applied for a job, and they wouldn't let me have it, so I can't get a job, so you need to give me unemployment benefits. We had this story come out over and over and over again. And again, job rejection. If you can't get a job, we want those benefits. We want them to go to you. But the system itself cannot be gamed in such a way, and especially can't be gamed in a way where under existing laws prior to the passage of Senate Bill 149, if you had a job with that same employer and you were fired for drug use, that disqualified you from unemployment benefits. But if you applied for a job with that employer and they rejected you for drug use, that got you unemployment benefits. That's not a fair way for the system to work. It's unequal. It makes absolutely no sense, and not something legislatively that we wanted to continue. The third issue is, how do we make drug treatment is better than financing illegal drug use? I think we can all agree on. How do we make drug treatment that works? How does that work? How can we handle that legislatively? If you look at studies, the simple answer is drug treatment works best when the root of the drug addiction is targeted. To quote from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, they've said, quote, effective treatment attends to multiple needs of the individual, not just his or her drug abuse. To be effective, treatment must address the individual's drug abuse and any associated medical, psychological, social, vocational, and legal problems. Further studies have shown the primary of these needs is vocational. That makes sense. If you don't have a job, you feel hopeless about your ability to get a job. That hopelessness is a driver that in certain instances can lead to drug addiction, and in instances where drug addiction exists, makes it harder to break that cycle of addiction. Drug treatment works better when job training is included with that drug treatment program. So what did Senate Bill 149 do with this foundation, which was a multi-month foundation that Dalton and I worked on, and this has been worked on for many years nationally? How did we try to craft Senate Bill 149? What does it do at the end of the day to look at these three problems? First, requires drug testing for TANF recipients if there is a reasonable suspicion that they're using illegal substances. First question, of course, comes with that is, well, how do you know if there's a reasonable suspicion? I'm an attorney, we use that term all the time, but what does that mean in the real world? Well, the good thing is there is a national standard that's used in multiple states. It's developed out of Utah, that's used in many, many states to determine whether there's a reasonable suspicion that you have a person that's applying for TANF assistance that is using illegal drugs. It's called the SASE pre-screening program. SASE program has been used for well over a decade in Kansas prior to the introduction of Senate Bill 149, proven highly effective at screening for drug use. That SASE test, no additional cost, already used, provides the basis for reasonable suspicion that underlies whether a drug test is administered or not. Someone tests positive. What do we do on Senate Bill 149? What we do is we're targeting those criteria that I mentioned before. It prohibits individuals who fail a drug test from receiving TANF benefits, but not forever. They are prohibited from receiving those benefits until they go through a drug treatment program and through a job skills training program. There's a second failed drug test after that. You have to repeat those steps, you have a year prohibition. Third test after that would result in a lifetime suspension of TANF benefits. Important, and this goes directly to what I think is the key issue behind Senate Bill 149 that we've already discussed. If a parent fails a drug test, cash assistance for the kids that receive the TANF benefits will go to a drug-free third party to administer on the child's benefit. Preference is given to other family members, the other parent, grandparents, cousins, nephews, other family members, or people that can prove a close pre-existing relationship. We want those kids to get the money. We don't want to deprive money from any child that qualifies for TANF. We want to make sure they're getting it and it's used in the right way. On the unemployment front, we're taking a slightly different approach, and one that is extremely cost-effective, as in cost-free. And that is for potential employers that have a job applicant that are doing drug testing already. If they have an applicant that fails a drug test, they have to submit that information to the Department of Labor. We're not creating a new bureaucratic requirement with this, because that requirement already applied under federal law if someone that works for them fails a drug test. The mechanism is already there in the Department of Labor system. Employers know that system. They've used it. It's worked for decades. Apply that same system to job applicants. If an employer doesn't test, then they don't have to do anything that they weren't already doing before. And the requirement for individuals who tested positive or refused to take a drug test would be suspension of unemployment benefits until they created or completed a job skills training program and the drug treatment program. In short, we designed Senate Bill 149. It's a model that's being used. Texas is implementing basically cut and paste the statute. We've had half a dozen other states that have looked at this model as well. Because Senate Bill 149 is the most family-friendly, treatment-focused drug testing program in the country that's not depriving people in need of government assistance, but is making sure that taxpayer dollars are used wisely and used best for the benefit of all candidates.
First off, just like I'm Braden Beard. Thank you very much, Independence Public Library, for setting this thing up. It's a very great privilege and a wonderful opportunity. Thank you, Senator Jeff King, for accepting this debate. It's very much a privilege, and I'm very excited about this debate. Thank you, Montreal, for taking the time to debate this round with me. Today's resolution is Senate Bill 149, which I'm going to summarily cite as basically just getting welfare, people who receive welfare need to get drug tested. So today I'll be breaking down the reason why this bill actually doesn't do some of the things that the Senator actually talked about and how it doesn't accomplish these goals. And better yet, that we might revisit this so we can find another plan that does. The 5 contentions I'll be breaking down this with today is that the first contention is that the premise of the bill in itself is flawed. Then we'll go on to our second contention, which is that the bill doesn't actually save taxpayers money, but actually transfers the money we pay to drug testing industries, which we'll talk more about. Our third contention will be that government assistance recipients are not lazy freeloaders, contrary to the common belief. And that the fourth contention and final will be that mandatory or selective drug testing is inherently problematic. So starting with my first contention today is that the premise of the bill itself is flawed. Now there is a exaggerated claim going around that basically people who are on welfare use drugs at a higher rate than the rest of the general population. And evidence gained from statistics from the other states that have already enacted such legislation can show that this is actually not true. Results from the 2014 National Survey on Drug Abuse and Health showed that 9.4% of the American population actually openly admitted to doing drugs. But it also showed that 2% of those people were on government assistance, receiving welfare. So less people on welfare were doing drugs than the rest of the better off counterparts in America. And it's been shown in multiple states that there's actually a low rate of drug abuse among welfare users. There was only one drug user among 800 welfare recipients in the state of Tennessee versus the 8% of the general population. There was, in Utah, 0.2% of people who were on welfare tested positive for drugs, compared to the 6% of the general population of Utah itself. The subpoint of this argument is, on top of already pointing out that there is no drug epidemic, we would also show that the process itself is super expensive and actually does not save anyone money. According to NPR, March 11, 2015, in the state of Missouri, 38,790 people applied for welfare in 2014. 48 people tested positive. That's less than 1% of the amount of people who apply for welfare. This drug testing cost the state of Missouri $336,297. That's not being fiscally conservative. That wasn't saving money. That was just to prove that the stereotype wasn't true. The list goes on with more. Is Mississippi in 2014, 3,656 people applied. 2 people tested positive. This costed them $5,290. Oklahoma, 3,342 people applied for welfare last year. To find out that 297 people within that welfare system were on drugs, it cost them $385,873. All of this money is being summarily spent. The source that we got this from shows that the 7 states that they had used the information to find this statistics about had spent over $1 million collectively just on drug testing alone in just the past 2 years that they've had it totally enacted. So, in looking at this information, where is the epidemic? Where is this concept coming from, this exaggerated claim that people who are on welfare do more drugs than the rest of the population? There is none, and there is no need to warrant such a bill like this to spend all of this money just to find out that that's not true. The information is already here. Even in our great state of Kansas, the number of welfare applicants in 2014 were 2,783. 11 people tested positive to drugs. We spent $40,000 to figure that out. And despite the evidence of having low drug abuse rates, we're also saying that the cost of finding all of this out is actually exceeding any hope of saving any of the money that we're telling people when we enact this legislation that we're trying to do. It sounds nice to say that we're being tough on deadbeats and that we're keeping people from buying drugs with the money that we're paying into our tax system. But there's no information, there's no facts to support that, and there's definitely we're not saving money just to figure out that it's been false the whole time. Poor people are trying to get out of the poor. Well, I'll just say this: poor people are actually trying to rise above their rank by making something out of their lives, and we're just throwing stereotypes at them and telling them that they do drugs because they want to get some help from the government just to get out of that situation. Going to our second contention today, this bill claims to save taxpayers money, but the benefactors aren't us, the people paying the taxes. It's the drug testing industry, the people who are testing us. Now, with like as I mentioned earlier, the 7 states, which are Arizona, Kansas, Missouri, Mississippi, Oklahoma, Tennessee, and Utah, collectively spent over $1 million just to find out that less than 1% of each welfare recipient list actually abused drugs. Now, according to investigative journalism conducted by the Washington Post, Florida Governor Rick Scott conveniently pushed mandatory drug testing right before his wife, who started a company named Solantic, started her own drug testing industry. He transferred $62 million into this business right before he mandated it that everyone on the welfare system had to get drug tested to receive welfare. And, Senator King in this bill actually tried to, whenever he wrote it, he included in it that we could actually drug test different representatives or members of higher government, things like that. One thing I'd like to point out is who has the power to actually call them out? Who has the power to actually say things like that? Can I ask Senator Jeff King right now, I want you to take a drug test? Where's my opinion going to get? That's just in there as a formality. That doesn't actually cover this situation of the fact that these higher representatives aren't actually, they're still outside of the system. And then we look at the part of extra testing that we have to do. One thing he said is that we have to do, if you fail the first test and you believe that it is not correct, you can get a second test. You have to pay for it. And if you fail that one, of course they won't reimburse you, but if you pass it, as in you don't test positive for drugs, then they'll pay you back. But that extra testing, the job counseling, the rehabilitation programs, these cost time on the government's part. These might cost you, but this is all money that's going from our state that we're paying into taxes. All of this is costing more. And in theory, it sounds like a good idea, once again, to try and attack the poor is what we're doing, but it honestly makes no sense. It only makes financial sense to the drug testing industry, who's making money off of this. I'll go ahead and jump into the third contention today, which is that government-assisted recipients, which are people who receive welfare, aren't lazy freeloaders. I was having a conversation with my friend's stepdad the other day, and he was talking about how he almost didn't want to pay into this just because he didn't want people who would sit on their butt all day and not work because they didn't want to. But the truth is, more than half the people in the welfare, that are receiving welfare, are also paying into the taxes that they're receiving through it. It showed that over nearly half or more of poor mothers on welfare were at least working part-time. According to Time magazine, 58% of the people who receive supplemental nutrition assistance program, which is SNAP, live in a household with earnings from a job. 58% of these people receiving it have a job, they're contributing to society, and they're actually being thrown these stereotypes and exaggerated claims that they might be doing drugs simply because they're wanting to get some extra help because they can't pay for the things they have. And another thing is that the rest of these people who can't work literally aren't supposed to work. It shows that 4 out of every 5 SNAP recipients belong to this category of can't work because they're not supposed to. 8% are people who are elderly, which are over 60 that can't work anymore. 11% are disabled adults. 45% are children under 18. Remembering these type of people that we're paying for, we also see that nearly $75 billion actually goes into funding the SNAP program. And with every $1 we spend in SNAP, it generates $1.73 in economic activity, which means we're actually making money off of and helping boost our economy through this program. And it means that there's no real economic loss with it. Now, it's hard enough for someone to get welfare, and it's even harder for you to go through the process. It can last months. You have to pee in a cup just for someone to help give you some money for food. The problem of you having to go ask someone for help for some people is hard enough. But through all these things you have to go through, it makes it even harder. And what we're doing is we're demonizing the poor. Now, I'm going to go ahead and jump into my fourth contention, which is that mandatory or selective drug testing is inherently problematic. Now, as it's been established, drug testing costs a lot of money. That's obvious. And we're in a tough time right now. We're in a depression that started in 2007. Now what happens is selective drug testing does lead to discrimination. Be it discrimination isn't exactly one of the strongest points you can pull. It is another reason why we need to revisit this bill here. Now what happens, the senator actually neglected to talk about it. When he said that the screening is called the SASE pre-screening, he didn't tell us what it was or how it worked. For all I know, it could be a questionnaire, it could be a checklist. And he also didn't tell us who decides whether or not we're suspicious to be tested. So is this the person that's handing you the check? Is this the person that you're saying, I need help? If it's just a checklist, what happens if they don't like you? What happens if you're a different skin color or sexuality or religion and they don't like it? This opens up all sorts of possibilities for lawsuits that can come back against the state and cost us all more money in taxes to help pay for it. I mean, all of these things that are all adding together, you can begin to see why this is starting to become a bigger issue. Now, the cost of random drug testing is already pretty high. You've seen that the 7 states have already spent over $1 million just to find out that less than 1% of each state that's receiving welfare is even testing positive. Now, that's randomly testing. That's based on suspicion. But because of this discriminatory issue, we would have to increase it to across the board just to make it more fair. It's either everybody or only somebody. If it's somebody, there's discrimination issues. If it's everybody, it's going to cost even more. If we only spent over just a couple hundred of each of the welfare to find out that they hardly even did drugs, what happens if every person, especially from the years to come, we continue to keep this legislation? Imagine the costs that are going to associate itself with this thing if we have across the board testing. So just imagine, there's honestly no better alternative here, which is another reason we need to revisit or drop the bill. Now, in contention one, we talked a little bit how the premise of the bill is flawed. And the supporting argument for that is that drug testing is not always accurate. Many folks don't know this, but it's actually called the U.S. Anti-Doping Agency. They put forward a statement that said out of every 85 people who were tested for drugs, 9 people were guaranteed to be erroneously, which means false, falsely get a false positive. And that means that 10% of every amount is always going to have a false positive. Several people here may not know that ibuprofen, Advil, Motrin, several different fever remedies, and even certain antibiotics can actually give you a false positive. One thing that the senator did not talk about is what kind of drug test we're going to have. There's it's a 5 or a 9, is what we're just simply going to call it right now. And a 5, I'll just say prong for now, just because I can't remember the word. A 5-prong drug test kind of measures for like some of the lower drugs, maybe like pot or cigarettes or things like that. It's just trying to figure out some of the smaller things. It's a little bit cheaper, but it doesn't actually tell you all the things that the person's doing. The 9 actually measures for multiple things. It can range up to coke and meth and even over-the-counter pills. Like it can tell you that much about the person. But those are also more expensive. So what are we doing with this situation? Are we taking the 5 where we get kind of a loose reading? Are we taking the 9 where we're spending a whole bunch of money and we're finding out exactly what pills they're taking? That was not mentioned. I would ask that in response time you might clarify that. In our second contention, we also talked about how the bill claims to save taxpayers money, when really it just transfers the money we're paying into taxes and basically transfers it up the line up to the people who run the drug testing industry. And there's another stereotype or exaggerated claim that somehow if we don't crack down on this, then all of a sudden more people are going to want to get on welfare and they're going to start just being lazy freeloaders like we talked about earlier. But that's inaccurate. SNAP is based off of kind of how the economy is at the time. So whenever the economy, like it is now, is in a depression or recession, it actually expands its enrollment, which means more people are in it because more people need help. But when we're in a moment of prosperity and we're doing good, it actually gets smaller, the amount of enrollment of people that are actually drawing from welfare. So when we're doing better, we're also not paying as many taxes. This is just another reason to help the poor, not subject them to some humiliating process of just to help take care of their kids or feed themselves. Now, one thing that the senator actually talked about was, he actually brought up the same situation I'm going to bring up, is that getting drug tested for a job. Now imagine, think about this. You can choose to go to work. Everyone knows that. You can choose to not go to work. You can choose to try a different job. With certain jobs that do drug testing, you can choose jobs that don't have drug testing, right? So there's always an access out there to money, whether or not you want to work for a higher level, but that's up to you. That's besides the point. The point I'm making is, students, high school students, I played football in high school. Because I was playing something that was my choice, was subjected to drug testing because they wanted to make sure that we were not taking drugs when we were in high school. And this was something to keep people from doing drugs on the team because that could also get the school in trouble, and you know how that works. But what we're making with this, those are choices. Is it honestly your choice to be in a time of poverty or need and you want to get help, and we're going to compare the same situation to, I need to get drug tested at work because I can work there, but I don't have a choice when it comes to being poor. I need help, and if my government won't help me because they feel like I'm doing drugs or false positive or things like that, we also end up looking at, like, once again, more discriminatory, all sorts of problems open up with this. And with that, I want to just recapitulate on some of the things that we talked about. So, we talked about how the premise of the bill is flawed. How spending money to save money later isn't working. How we spend $1 million in 7 states just to find out that less than 1% of each state was even tested positive, compared to the rest of the people that weren't even on welfare. We've shown that people on welfare are us, are people that are paying in taxes as well. And the rest of them are people that can't get help. I mean, we keep going, we also start realizing that through the statistics and information we've shown, there's no epidemic. There's no need for this bill. There's no need for it to warrant such a bill. We do not need to try and keep poor people down. as a Christian, one of the biblical things that we learn is that there are many friends of the poor and little friends of the poor and many friends of the rich. This is just another example of that, of demonizing and patronizing and witch hunting the poor, keeping them down and never letting them get to another state of where they want to get to, something more. Making middle class, sometimes that's the goal. I know I was raised in a poor home. Getting to middle class sounds really nice. Getting poor, you have a bigger than 1,000 square foot house. I mean, you know, these things are, you have to take all these things in accountability. Two of the problems that the senator addressed that he said was kind of the primary reason that they saw a need for this bill was that, in question 4, how can we help, why would we send money basically to those who don't need it, that are going to use it to buy drugs? Today we've shown that that's not true. These people can't use like food stamps or things like that to buy drugs. You can't buy dog food with stamps. You can't buy deli from Marvin's. You have to buy food that you make yourself. The other thing that he has said was, how can we use these funds for the betterment of the kids of Kansas? I don't think sending these kids into a separate home because their parents send a drug test is going to help the kids. I don't think it's going to help Kansas. Spending all this money, when we just withdrew so much money for public education, and we're spending all this money just to test people on drugs, and finding out that they're not doing drugs, but we want to keep spending more money on this, it's not going to help the state of Kansas. Then he talked about 3 points about how he wanted to find a drug treatment that works and things like this. Well, in revisiting this bill, we can come up with a new approach for this. My job is, as the negative, we're not going to actually like give you a plan or give you an idea of what you should do. But one thing we do need to point out is that we need to revisit this situation and understand a little bit more about how helping the people is more of the focus than spending lots of money just to try to keep the poor people from receiving welfare or help. What we're doing is what he did say was that we do send people who fail these tests, I think it was twice, either once or twice, to drug treatment, job counseling, things like this. And what that does is it could help, but what we need to do is spend our direct efforts in helping the poor, getting out of that economic tough times, helping them get away from this. It's been shown that lower economic poverty level places of different countries are actually more prone to do drugs, to have babies at a young age, and that's because a lot of times it's been shown that they have sometimes, kind of like the senator said himself, there's like you get trapped in this motion, I can't accomplish anything, I need to get stuff ready and start getting, on down the line. We need to start addressing that. We need to start making that our primary concern, helping people, not keeping them from welfare or keep trying to keep those who don't deserve it. Let's just focus on the problem of drugs entirely, of poor people entirely, not waging war on drugs or waging war on poverty, just helping people in general. Like, we just need to revisit the situation. And once again, my name is Braden Beard. I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you once again for this opportunity to debate this. And
they didn't tell me part of this job is going to be learning how to operate the timer. Clearly beyond my capabilities, so we'll just wing it. And someone will tell me if I talk to them here. I think I got it. On the Senate floor when we're debating, when someone gives a speech against you, about 5 other people speak before you get to talk. So I'm used to having about 20 more minutes to prepare for this. This is a reminder of what debate was like when I did it in high school. I appreciate the daunting task ahead of me. There were 4 points primarily brought up by the negative in their discussion. I'm going to conflate those into 3 because I think the original point, the premise argument that was brought by the negative, was really a repetition of their 3rd point as well. And that is the fundamental argument I hear against the premise against a drug testing regime, a drug treatment regime, like we have seen with Senate Bill 149, is the premise is wrong. You're trying to demonize the poor. You're trying to make people that are in poverty feel worse because they're in poverty. You're trying to give them a stigma in society because they're poor. You're treating them in an anti-Christian way and in an immoral way because they are poor. There was a biblical excerpt used by the negative. I will rely on a proverb instead to encapsulate why I think the premise of this is actually correct. The ancient Chinese proverb that once said that if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, and if you teach a man to fish, he will never grow hungry again. TANF payments to people that are addicted to drugs, that's not giving someone a fish, that is actually making their problem worse. To me, what is demonizing the poor, what is treating someone in an inhumane fashion more than they have a problem and you actually feed into the addiction that's tearing them down. Instead, if you want to address the problem, if you want to add dignity to the situation, if you want to humanize what is a horrible, horrible tragedy that drug addiction brings to our community here in Southeast Kansas and around the state, you as a government are obligated to identify it and fight it. There is dignity that comes in that, not from ignoring something that already exists. And I will agree, if the premise of this bill were that people on welfare use illegal drugs more than people not on welfare, then I would say the negative is right, because that's an awful premise. And that is wrong, and that is not, never has been, never should be, and if I can do anything about it, never will be the premise of Senate Bill 149 and its implementation. What that premise is simply there are people that are on welfare that are addicted to illegal drugs. It is wrecking their life. It is wrecking their family's life. We can identify them. With a great degree of certainty, we can identify them. We can help them. If we can do it, we as a government have an obligation when we're engaged in that arena to do it, to do whatever we can. To me, ignoring that would be demonizing the poor, not accepting it and engaging it. I would argue, in fact, that Senate Bill 149, more so than probably any of its other counterparts, but that this discussion actually helps empower those that are on welfare, because I can tell you when I've campaigned, I can tell you the discussions I've had, there is a sentiment in large parts of the public that people on welfare, it's an incorrect sentiment to be sure, that people on welfare abuse drugs more than people that aren't. Programs like Senate Bill 149 prove that's not true. We've seen statistics already in the program that show there is a drug problem, but it's not worse than in general society. That information is out there, and it's out there more because of the debate we had on this bill than it ever was before. That information is changing attitudes. It's changing mindsets. It's providing dignity to people that deserve all the dignity in the world that we have to offer, as much as anyone else in any other context. Second premise, and so to conclude with that premise, basically the negative was trying to paint a false premise for this bill, one that, if true, certainly is a fatal flaw to this legislation, but because this legislation is based on a much stronger foundation, one that is working on providing dignity to the poor, the foundation adds, not detracts from what Senate Bill 149 is accomplishing. The second point that I'd like to address, and do a little bit out of order because I think it makes the approach to the third point stronger. The second point I'd like to address is, does this work or not? First thing that struck out to me, I know in political debates, and I was even coming up and thinking I'd make a partisan wisecrack, I don't think I'm going to, because it's not appropriate in the sense that you know what the easiest way is to tell that an elected official or someone running for office is probably not fully up on an issue or may not warrant your trust on that issue that they're trying to address. It's when they punch holes in one plan and they don't have any other alternative. We have no other alternative that's presented to what everyone in this room knows is a problem. Illegal drug use is a problem. Unfortunately, I hate that this is true. It's more of a problem in Southeast Kansas than a lot of the rest of the state. We know it's a problem here. We know we need to address it. Senate Bill 149 offers a solution. We have no other solution that's before us today. So when we look at effectiveness, that alone is something you need to evaluate Senate Bill 149 by. But then let's look at other aspects of the effectiveness of this plan. The unemployment part of the plan was not addressed at all previously. I'll leave that be, because popularly the TANF portion is what is discussed more. There are 3 components: identifying the people to help, helping them through drug treatment, helping them through job skills training. I'm going to get to identifying last because that will feed into the cost element a little bit. But if we look at identifying, is the drug treatment working? Does the job skills training program work? These are done in tandem for a reason. They're only done in tandem for Kansas. As I talked about before, studies show, research shows they work better together than alone. You want to treat the problem, the root of the problem, as well as the symptom of the problem. So how are we doing at treating the root of the problem? We're treating the root of the problem with a program called Partners in Change. Some of you may have heard of Partners in Change. ICC has actually used it some in partnership with Neosho Community College that authored the Partners in Change program. Partners in Change is a huge success story. Outside the context of this debate, if you can tell people about Partners in Change, do it. It's fantastic. It's a 6-week program that focuses on job skills training. The core of the belief of the program is work ethic is a muscle. It atrophies when you don't use it. So if someone's been out of work for months or years, you've got to get that work ethic muscle working again. You got to get people used to getting ready, getting those basic skills, holding a job. It works over 6 weeks to do that. $750 cost, 88% success rate. That means 88% of the people that have been in this program either get a job when they come out of it or go to an advanced degree or job training program that helps get them a job afterwards. 88%, $750. So $750, we just announced the acquisition this last week, actually, of a multi-million-dollar federal grant to use federal funds, no state taxpayer dollars, to implement this program. No cost on the state general fund, no cost directly to state taxpayers, a program that works, and that works in this context. So we look then at the identification of the people that are using illegal drugs. There was a suggestion by the negative in this case that we use, that doing reasonable likelihood, that using the reasonable suspicion test is somehow discriminatory. I find that an interesting conclusion from the negative when they suggested using complete drug testing instead, because you know what? Florida and Missouri tried that. I always like when we can pick on Florida and Missouri, especially Missouri, because we pick on Missouri more. They tried it. You know what the federal appellate court in Florida said? You can't do it because it violates constitutional rights of someone to drug test them when there's no suspicion that they're using illegal drugs. Besides the fact, when we get the cost later, it is astronomically more expensive to test everyone than test people for whom you just have a reasonable suspicion. So I think that suggests in the negative we can set aside. How much does reasonable suspicion work? In the state of Kansas, what we've had is about 40% of the time that people are selected for drug testing with reasonable suspicion, the drug tests have come up positive. We have found if you use the combination of the reasonable suspicion and the drug test, you use those in combination for a reason. Not only the constitutionality, but if you use the combination, you dramatically reduce false positives. We saw that in Utah that engineered the SASE program. When you use a SASE test plus a drug test, the combination of those two will decrease your false positives by multiple magnitudes. We've reduced false positives, we've reduced costs, we've identified the folks that are in need. Let's finally get to cost with effectiveness. The numbers, and I admit, if I were sitting up here defending Florida and Missouri's drug testing program today, I'd have a hard time saying it's cost effective. Reason? They didn't use reasonable suspicion. They tested everyone. They used more expensive tests, and they didn't have the narrowing criteria we talked about before for the people that qualified on unemployment benefits. They didn't use the pre-existing tests at all. So of course, if you test everyone, it's going to be more expensive than testing with reasonable suspicion. So let's use the numbers that actually happened in Kansas. See, I have about 30 seconds left to do that, so I will do them quickly. In Kansas, through this year, we are on an annual pace. The program only started a year ago. It's really got going this calendar year. We're on pace to test about 260 people and have 86 folks that test positive, roughly 35–40%. That cost will be about $100 a drug test, $26,000 to identify 86 people, 86 families that are on public assistance, plagued by the scourge of drug addiction, whose kids aren't getting the money directly that they need, who aren't getting the treatment that they need. And if this program can positively affect, let's say it helps half of them, if it can positively affect 43 families in the state of Kansas a year, the cost of $26,000 and some federal grants, I would say this is one of the most successful things I've seen in the legislature, not one of the least.
I'm just going to move this a little bit.
Careful.
Okay, is everyone ready? Okay. Before I begin, I'd like to thank everyone who's responsible for setting this event up and Senator King for coming down here and giving us a chance to debate this, because this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity and I'm pretty excited. So let's go ahead and begin. I'd like to begin my speech with a little bit of a quote. Bruce Springsteen said, "I have spent my life judging the distance between American reality and the American dream." What is the difference between the reality of being an American and the dream of being American? The American dream has many parts to it. There's the white picket fences, large green lawns, a family of kids, having a pet, getting that oldest kid that dream car on their 16th birthday. Never going to focus on whether or not your family is going to be able to eat that night, or in the morning if they're going to be able to eat at the same time. The American reality is that sometimes your picket fences are replaced with barred windows. Your large green lawns are replaced with Section 8 homes, and that you have to move into your car on your child's 16th birthday because economic hardships, a system that doesn't care if you need to eat, takes you from your home. Those are just a few of the differences between the dream that we'd all like to think it means to be an American and what people have to go to when they need government assistance. And that is what we really need to focus on today before I get into the entirety of my speech, is that we're talking about real lives and real people, and that these statistics and these numbers aren't just here for fun. Like, people are living the American reality, and depending on how this bill gets looked at, or if it gets passed, will affect real lives, not just statistics and numbers, and it won't just not exist after we get done talking. Government aid is for those that face the American realities, for hardworking Americans that need that extra opportunity to feed their families. But the stereotype is that aid users are drug-lord corpses of humans. But as you will find out, that those are fighting to survive their American reality while striving for the American dream that some of us are living today and that everyone else is striving to live for today. And frankly, it is offensive to assume that the war on drugs can be won by targeting those who need government aid. Throughout this next 20 minutes, we'll examine how there are a plethora of reasons why this bill is flawed and why it needs critically examined before we do anything to stop the war, to further the war on drugs in Kansas. I have a few responses directly towards some of the things that Jeff King said in his last speech and throughout his first speech as well. First, he gives you this analogy where it says, if you give a man a fish, you feed a man for a day. But if you teach a man to fish, you feed him for the rest of his life. Well, if you hold his head underwater and continually alienate him, or just simply continue holding his head underwater, he's going to drown. And that is exactly what this bill is doing. It's not teaching people how to fish, but it's telling them that we don't care and you are a drug addict, so we are going to treat you as such. And that is one thing that he argues, is the premise of the bill isn't flawed. We have to say that the exact premise is based on the fact that there is a drug epidemic in those who are impoverished and those who seek government aid. Meaning that the exact premise of this bill is saying that if you are government aid, there's a good chance you are doing drugs. So we need to spend money to stop you from doing drugs. Now, she's going to try to tell you that that is not the premise of this bill, but I cannot. What else is the premise of the bill? Like, why is this bill important if it's not to try to stop some mythical problem that doesn't actually exist, where my partner has given you statistics that are saying that this is not a problem. Anybody who's done this plan in other states has not seen a significant problem. Like Senator King brings up the example that Utah has this really good program for the regional suspicion, my fault. But if you look to what my partner said in the first part of his speech, 0.2% of people actually showed up positive out of the state of Utah with their reasonable suspicion. That shows that not only it fails, but it just isn't effective, and there is not a problem. When we look at empiric examples of other places that have tried this, there is no problem. And that is one thing that we need to stress throughout today, is that the problem is not people in poverty doing drugs, but it's the drugs being in America themselves. And that is the biggest problem with the war on drugs, and that is based on the fact that people that are poor, or people that have been economically or socioeconomically segregated, are the reasons for drug abuse. No, the problem with drug abuse is not correlated to being poor. It's correlated with a plethora of other things that need to be examined before we start targeting the poor and making them, trying to get them to survive while being alienated. That is another thing, is people are trying to survive, and plans like this just further alienate them and make it harder for them to survive. Two, there aren't, the people just aren't doing drugs. Like I said previously, my partner gave me statistics about how drugs are not a problem with people with government aid. Like, it is not that big of a deal. Like, there are a few people that do it, but there's not like a giant statistic. Like 97% of people on government aid aren't doing drugs. So what is the epidemic? What is the problem? The definition of epidemic that I know is that affects a majority of the population as a significant problem and is a plague amongst a majority of the population. If 0.2% of people are doing drugs on government aid, how is that an epidemic? It doesn't even go to a full 1%. Like, Senator King is basically just bolstering up and making these wild charges without providing the statistics, which is my next point. He gives you no statistics saying that there is an epidemic. He just tells you that there is an epidemic, and because of his stance, you're supposed to believe that there is an epidemic, whereas my partner and I have, my partner mainly has provided evidence that shows you that there is no epidemic. Just to address what he tried to respond to my partner's argument on how the reasonable suspicion fails by saying that we argued that we need to do complete drug testing. Both of these fail because either complete drug testing, you catch a few more people, but it's outrageously expensive, or with the random, it just fails because it's discriminatory and it's just very unpractical. And again, he has not explained to you the mechanism for this. Like, he tells you the name, like the SASE program or whatever, but he does not tell you how this works. And that is very important, because if he does not tell us who's going to be providing this reasonable suspicion, who's going to be giving these drug tests, when it's happening, where it's happening, how long they have before they have to take these drug tests, we have to assume that it is very flawed, because he's just throwing a name at you but not explaining it. If I looked at you and just said, poverty, and just stared at you for 20 minutes, you wouldn't want to prefer my stance because I'm not explaining anything to you. And that is exactly what is happening right now. Is Senator King is explaining something in a very broad way, and we're expected to just listen to it. I do not believe that is how educated discourse should go. Now finally, just to rehash this Utah, his biggest source, or his biggest example is Utah and their system. 0.2% of people they drug tested showed up positive for drugs. We need to focus on that. Like, seriously, this is the most important thing. His biggest example is also very contradictory to his stance. Now let's move on to some points from the beginning of Senator King's speech. One, when he talks about the children, what about the middle class drug users? Don't their children matter too? Like the middle people that have the money to do drugs, that have actually shown statistically more likely to do drugs. What about those kids? Shouldn't we try to help those kids as well? Well, the simple thing is apparently poor kids matter more than the middle class kids. Or we just feel like we need to target the people impoverished more, which is what my partner is trying to get at, is that we have this system where if you are in the middle class or above, you're good. Like, you can do pretty much whatever you want. But if you're impoverished, it does not matter what you try to do. You are a drug addict, and we need to fix your problem. And I don't believe that is how we should view people that are struggling every day to achieve what we have. Secondly, why are we focusing on the cycle of dependency that welfare and these programs provide? Like, why are we focusing on getting people out of this and not taking into consideration drugs? Like, we're thinking like that drugs are the sole reason people are on welfare and things like this. We need to break this cycle of dependency so kids are less likely to go on welfare also after they get out of their parents' homes. That is, if we really care about the kids, that is what we need to focus on. Now, we've already talked about discrimination, so we're going to go and talk about the drug testing panels for right now. There are the 5-panel tests that give you like the basic drugs like marijuana, ecstasy, meth, like those things, like the very basic large drugs. And then the 9 panels show you a plethora of everything, like you have pseudoephedrine, something you get over the counter to fix sinuses. That shows up on these drugs. Poppy seeds can be picked up on these drugs. There's been multiple things where if you eat a poppy seed bagel and go take a drug test, you show up positive for opiates. We need to understand that both of these tests are bad. One, because one is not very specific and expensive, and the other one is too specific, and it just makes it to where this is almost a given that you are going to show up positive for drugs. And until there's a clarification on how these drugs are going to, tests are going to be taken, we can't assume that this is going to be a good idea. Now let's move on and extend on some of my partner's arguments, and then we will conclude. First, these people are not freeloaders. They are hardworking Americans or people that literally cannot work. That's another thing that we need to look at when deciding whether or not this bill is a good idea, is that this isn't just about people that are not doing anything, just living off taxpayer dollars. They are putting into a system, and they need help, and they're getting back, or they literally cannot do anything. Like, for example, if I told you that from now on, every U.S. veteran had to take a drug test before they got any kind of their benefits, that is a legitimate problem. That is not okay. Because they are a veteran or something, we shouldn't target them and make them take drug tests. That's the exact same thing with people in poverty. Just because they are struggling or cannot work or mentally or physically disabled does not mean that we need to make them take these drug tests. If we're going to have this framework that if people need help, they need help, and we shouldn't judge them, we need to do that exact same thing for all people that need help and stop judging people based on their socioeconomic status. Now let's move on and talk more about these drug tests and extending on with my other arguments. Drug testing is sometimes inaccurate, expensive, and furthers an unhealthy climate of classism. According to the Anti-Drug Doping Agency, 85 people who test positive, 9 out of those 85, or 10.6%, will erroneously be identified as drug users. So while 1% error rate, false positive sounds good, 10% of the positives will be false. Additionally, many drugs can cause false positive results, including ibuprofen, Advil, Motrin, cold, or any fever remedies, or quotidian antibiotics, for example. These, over-the-counter drugs that you take when you can't get a prescription, can give you a positive and label you as a drug user. That's another thing, is we don't, 10% of those positives are false positives, which needs to, again, be critically addressed. Now I was going to talk about the government overreach. Supporters of this bill generally favor individual liberty, but all of a sudden there's a support for big government because of the exaggerated claim that individuals are spending public money on drugs. We rage against government making people buy health insurance or bake cakes for gay weddings, but we don't seem to have a problem with government making poor people take drug tests because someone suspects that they may be on a drug and unworthy of assistance. All of a sudden, big government is no longer a bad thing. The reason for the apparent contradiction is that we have an exaggerated notion that poor people are taking our money and buying drugs, and evidently it's easier to pick on the poor. For example, the state of Kansas went a step further with the temporary assistance of needy families known as TAN. The state limited the amount of cash withdrawals from $25 a day. This just shows how people are targeted right now that gain government assistance. What can any person do with a family on $25 a day? Honestly, if you're going to feed your family at a restaurant, how are you going to use $25 a day to feed your entire family out of your own pocket? And some people, they don't have the access to a lot of other funds, so that $25 a day may but be what they're trying to feed their kids off of. And we're telling them that these kind of stereotypes are okay, based on that they might, the evidence here says that banning use of debit cards as long as a list of business types, including cruise ships. The lawmakers behind the cruise ship ban didn't claim TANF had been used on a cruise, but it's theoretically possible was enough to move legislation. So because something is theoretically possible, it's theoretically possible that everybody on government aid could be doing drugs, we should make all these laws for it. There makes no sense behind the reason why these kinds of laws are made. And the recent the $25 TANF ban is an example of how these laws are based on false premises or just theoretics. And we should not base our laws that affect people off theoretical ideas. And also, keep in mind that TANF and food stamps represent a small slice of the federal benefit budget. One tax code giveaways are taken into account. The largest housing program is not Section 8, but the mortgage interest deduction, with funnels some $70 billion towards homeowners, with the bulk of the tax expenditure going to wealthier Americans. Proposals to make homeowners prove they're not on drugs or spend their money responsibly haven't gained steam. Basically what they're saying is that the biggest bailout isn't even to people in poverty. We're spending $70 billion to make sure that wealthy people get bailouts for their homes. And we're not drug testing them to make sure that they get this access to this money. See, it's totally hypocritical and totally offensive to assume just because someone is in a lower socioeconomic stance, they are more likely to do drugs. And we're not even bailing them out as much as we are the middle and upper classes. That is one of the things that is very alarming, is that we can just allow all of this to continue. Now, as I conclude my speech, I've talked a lot about what Jeff King has addressed in his speeches, and we've had to understand that until valid statistics are brought up, we cannot assume that what he's telling you is accurate, because there are no actual statistics supporting his stances. And that is one thing that needs to be evaluated before anything else, is that if we're just going to get up and just start spouting things, there should be things that validate those points. And also, that if we're going to be thinking about the kids, we need to think about the kids, not about the poor kids or the kids that might have drug abusers as parents. We need to think that we need to break these stereotypes. We need to break the cycle of dependency on the government. We need to do these things and stop worrying about if we're going to think about the children, then we can't think about the children and then not think about them. If that makes any sense, and we have to think about them as a whole, or as trying to help them rather than targeting them. Also, that if we're going to try to help people in poverty, we can't continue to alienate them and have this hypocritical stance. Now, as I conclude my speech, we've understood that the American dream and the American reality are two very different things. And for those people that have a problem with understanding what the American reality is, we have to also understand one important thing, that every form of addiction is bad, no matter whether it's narcotic or alcohol or morphine or idealism. And that is the one drug that seems to be plaguing the United States more than anything else, is the idealism or the ideology that if you are poor, you are a drug user. If you are poor, you are less than a person. If you are poor, then you will stay poor, and we should not try to help you, or we should try to make you jump through hoops to help you. And with that, I just would strongly urge that we critically analyze this bill and make sure that we actually are doing things to help those in poverty rather than target them. For that, I thank you for your time.
I'm going to pull this back because I'm short. Don't worry, I had years of training speaking after Derek Schmidt of moving microphones, so I'm used to that. Before I start, I know that both Monroe and Braden have very graciously thanked me for coming here. I would be remiss if I didn't start this instead by thanking them for debating today. I don't know how exactly you were told, oh, you're debating Senator King, and the topic he chose was a bill that he wrote and he pushed through the legislature and he spent 6 months of his life on, but if you could learn up on it and debate him, that'd be great. So I think I'm going to have to do this again, and you get to choose the topic next time. But you've both done a great job. Really appreciate you letting me participate today. In making my concluding remarks, I'm going to put the shoe on the other foot from what I just did. I debated IHS for 2 years, and I love Bruce Springsteen, and I never beat a Coffeyville debater. So I've got 2 challenges here following someone from Coffeyville who voted the boss to lead off with our remarks. But I would rather start with a different quote that the negative brought up in their discussion, and I think it's an excellent one. Paraphrasing the first part, we can't judge the people who are in need. The quote is, when people need help, they need help. Amen. That's exactly right. I cannot agree with the negative more on that statement. Unfortunately, one of the jobs we have in the legislature, it's the job that's the hardest. And I know we had, former superintendent here, 2 members of the State Board of Education here, and they probably have similar stories to tell with this. We face a lot of folks that need help. The first thing you have to do is that's not enough to know. You have to know what help do they need? How can we provide it? Can we afford to provide it? Because it's an unfortunate reality. There are more people that need help than we have the resources to help. And there are a lot of people that need help that need it in ways that we don't understand and we can't address. So the first thing is we need to find out what help they need. You're talking about the SASE, the substance abuse screening tool. That's what it's there for. It's to help the Department of Children and Families figure out what help do people need. The premise of Senate Bill 149 is people who are addicted to drugs need different help than people who aren't. Not putting a stigma on them. We all suffer problems. We all have things we have to deal with in life. It's not my job as a legislator, it's not my job as a human being to judge anyone for the problems that they have to deal with. But as a legislator, it is my job, and we're providing public assistance. It's called public assistance for a reason. You're trying to assist the public. My job is to figure out, our job is to figure out, what does that segment of the public need? How do we assist them? That's what Senate Bill 149 is doing. We're figuring out what that segment of the public needs. How do we assist them? How do we do that in the best way possible? And if you look at the mechanism, the negative, and I think very correctly pointed out, I haven't spent a lot of time talking about mechanism here. One of the reasons I've talked about the mechanism of treatment ad nauseum. I think they're talking about the mechanism for identifying people that are using illegal drugs. One reason I haven't talked about that mechanism is anyone in local government here will, I think, probably agree with me when I say this. One of the things the legislature does horribly, and when we are at our worst, is when we think we know it all. When we think we know what to tell local units of government, we think we know how to run our cities better than you, we know how to run your schools better than you. When we tell a department with experts, we know how to decide how you do drug tests better than you. There's a reason that discretion is given. There's a reason we have agencies. There's a reason we have experts. We gave the experts, Department of Children and Families, and their substance abuse treatment experts, we went in and we designed this bill and said, how do you best identify this? Said, we have looked at studies, the best way to identify it right now, today, is using a SASE test and then a 5-point action and drug test afterwards. Tomorrow, that may be different, because if you'd asked them that question 10 years ago, it would have been entirely different. I would guess if you asked them that question, even 5 years from now, it will be different. Statutes go bad when they're inflexible to things that inevitably change. The best way to diagnose drug addiction will inevitably change. We provided that flexibility. Certainly what they do now is using a test. You can look it online. People debated before they could go online in between rounds and look at things, but you can look online. It shows you the best methodology that they use now, what methodology that's used by the department. That can be scrutinized. It has been scrutinized. It works as well as our modern methodology allows it to work. And when combined, screening with testing, those two work better than either alone and provides the best range of certainty that we could possibly have. And at the end of the day, if you look at the figures, if you have a 1% error ratio of testing, even up to 1 to 10% false positives, after a test that is proven to screen out 75% of the time accurately anyway, you're down to 0.25% to 2.5% false positives, and none of that is ever good. But if you were 40 times more likely to identify someone and help them than to identify them wrongly, in this instance, that's a net positive. You're helping more people. That's what we need to do. The negative mentioned, there's certain types of federal assistance that don't use this model. And, use that as an example of why we shouldn't. I will tell you, if the state were constrained by everything that Washington did, we'd never get anything done. I'm really glad we are constrained by what Washington does, because that's why our founding fathers set up a federal system that worked, is that we aren't. On many issues, the states are the laboratories. We're given the ability to experiment and make things work at solving problems. And I think the question isn't, why aren't we following the federal system? The question is, why aren't they following us? I wish they did that a whole lot more than just on Senate Bill 149. But I hope that the federal system looks at this model, looks at what's working, takes this and uses it in more federally regulated programs as well. Looking at cost, my next to last point, and one that's been harped on, this is costing too much money. Look at what all these other states, the costs they've incurred. There was an allegation that I haven't given enough statistics. Let's give statistics. Let's make sure we go through the TANF drug testing results report, which came out 2 days ago. And if you look at what came out 2 days ago, part of it confirms the negatives argument, and I'm not going to deny this. 0.063% of TANF recipients have tested positive for use of illegal drugs. You first hear that and you say, whoa, this program's a failure. Those are all that tested positive. Let's put real numbers on that, because to get to my final point, and I think you have to take these two together. Final point, the final quote from the negative, and I think it's the best quote that I've heard describe this issue, and I've worked on this for 3 years. Real lives are impacted, and real lives matter, end quote. Amen. That's why we're doing this. Take those percentages, turn them into real numbers. What are those real numbers? In the last 3 months alone, there are 22 people that tested positive for using illegal drugs on public assistance. We're on the rate for 86 this year. How much will those 86 cost? $40,000 to identify them. That breaks down to $500 per person we identify with illegal drug addiction. How much is it costing to help them? $750 to administer the Partners in Change program with an 88% success rate. Real lives impacted. Real lives matter. Those are 86 people, let's say the 88% off, let's say it works for half of them. Those are 43 families who will come out of this program with a real chance to kick a drug habit, a real chance to keep a job. Those are 43, in that case 86 families, whose kids have been sure that they've been getting the assistance they needed this time because the money wasn't funneled through someone who's trying and failing to kick a drug addiction. Those are 86 families. Those are your neighbors. Those are our friends. Those are people living just down the street that have a chance at a better life for $40,000. 0.063% work for me. In this context, any day of the week, I'd pass any bill that could have this type of impact. I'm proud to be part of passing this bill, not because I was part of it, because I think our neighbors' lives will be better because of this. And at the end of the day, that's why you are here. That's why I do what I do. And I appreciate the opportunity to do it. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. Thank you.
I would like to once again thank Braden and Monroe from the ACC debate team. I'd also like to thank the ACC debate team for coming out. If you guys want to stand up real quick, it's great to see you guys. I would like to thank Senator King for coming down and taking the time to partake in this debate as well. I would like to thank the museum for hosting this event as well as the exhibit. If it wasn't for the museum's partnership on this, we would not be able to have the Changing America exhibit here and defendants can be selected one of 50 sites in the nation to receive this exhibit. The next Changing America program will be on Tuesday, September 1st at the library with ICC's Dr. McCaffrey speaking on the Emancipation Proclamation. I would also like to ask you before you leave tonight to fill out the evaluation forms you received on your way in, and thank you for coming. Thanks to the debaters.
How's it going? Very good. Oh, man, that was a long time to sit. I've been sitting all day.
Who's this little girl?
Is it a requirement for plastic now?